playing softly in the background. Ashley had just finished packing for her girls' trip, and her hurried movements had left a trail of forgotten items scattered around their bedroom. A scarf she never wore anymore, a favorite perfume, and an extra pair of heels lay by the bed, oddly paired for a weekend with friends. It was Ashley's demeanor that caught Mark's attention. Normally vivacious, she had been oddly reserved over the last few weeks. Conversations had felt clipped, her laughter a bit too forced. Tonight, as she zipped her suitcase, she avoided his gaze. She offered quick excuses for her late-night texts and her sudden need for personal space, brushing off his inquiries with a breezy, "You're overthinking it." But Mark wasn't one to ignore his instincts. As Ashley breezed out the door, claiming her ride had arrived, Mark followed quietly. He stood by the window, pulling back the curtain just enough to watch her step into a sleek black car. Not the rideshare she had claimed, but a private sedan. His heart sank as his suspicions hardened into something undeniable. Over the years, Mark had always trusted Ashley. They had built a life together, full of memories and dreams for the future. But the cracks had started showing recently, with her strange late-night phone calls and excuses for working odd hours. Tonight felt like the culmination of all the doubts he'd tried to suppress. He waited a few minutes before grabbing his jacket and keys. Something about the way she'd left gnawed at him, and he couldn't let it go. Mark's drive through the quiet streets mirrored the turmoil in his mind. His gut told him to head downtown, to the luxurious hotel Ashley had mentioned in passing during a conversation weeks ago. She'd brushed it off as a hypothetical spot her friends might visit during their weekend. The thought lingered in his mind now, like a lead weight. Arriving at the Grand Regent Hotel, Mark parked his car at the far end of the lot and approached cautiously. From the lobby's expansive glass doors, he could see her. Ashley, dressed in the shimmering cocktail dress she'd insisted was too fancy for the girls' weekend, stood at the counter. The man leaned close to her, a tall figure with broad shoulders and an air of confidence. Their laughter echoed faintly as they exchanged what appeared to be easy, familiar conversation. Mark's heart thundered in his chest as he stepped back into the shadows. He pulled out his phone, snapped a picture of the scene, and tucked it away. For now, his emotions were held in check by the singular focus of uncovering the truth. His resolve solidified. Whatever Ashley was hiding, he was going to find out, no matter how painful it might be. As he turned to leave, he caught a glimpse of the man placing his hand gently on Ashley's back, guiding her toward the elevators. The sight burned in his mind and igniting a determination that would lead to a confrontation neither Ashley nor her companion Tyler would ever forget. Mark paced outside the hotel, his mind a whirlwind of anger, betrayal, and a gnawing need for answers. He felt the cold evening air pressing against him, but the heat of his emotions kept the chill at bay. The image of Ashley laughing with that stranger was burned into his mind, replaying over and over as if mocking him. Every step she'd taken toward the elevator had felt like a knife twisting deeper into his chest. He wasn't just angry, he was determined. As much as he wanted to storm inside, confront them and demand answers, Mark knew this required strategy. Ashley had already crafted layers of lies to protect her story, and a rushed confrontation wouldn't give him the closure or evidence he needed. He pulled out his phone again, scrolling to the voice recorder app. Tonight, he'd document everything. Instead of returning to his car, Mark walked into the hotel through a side entrance, careful to avoid the main lobby, where Ashley and her companion might still linger. The hotel was plush, with gold accents gleaming against marble floors and elegant chandeliers casting a warm glow. It smelled faintly of lavender and sophistication, a stark contrast to the turmoil in Mark's heart. He headed for the concierge desk, keeping his voice steady as he leaned in. "Excuse me," he said, his tone casual. "I think my wife left her room key in the car. Could you remind me what room she's in?" The concierge hesitated, glancing down at the monitor. Mark's pulse raced as he feigned an easy smile. "I'll call her if it's easier, but she might already be up in the room. She's, if with Tyler, about 6 feet tall, black suit." The casual name drop seemed to do the trick. Yes, the concierge said after a moment, eyes flicking to the screen. Room 418. I'll have an extra key sent up if you'd like. No need, Mark replied, fighting to keep his voice even. Thanks for your help. Room 418 loomed before him minutes later, the gold numbers on the doors seeming to taunt him. He wasn't sure what he'd find behind it, but the thought of turning back never crossed his mind. From the hallway, muffled voices filtered through the heavy wooden door. Ashley's voice was unmistakable, tinged with the soft, affectionate tone she used to reserve for him. Another voice, deeper, smooth, responded with a chuckle. Mark felt his stomach churn. Reining in his emotions, he pressed the voice recorder app and slipped it into his jacket pocket. Whatever happened next, he'd need to keep a cool head. He knocked twice, hard and deliberate. The voices inside fell silent. After a long pause, the door opened just a crack, revealing Ashley's startled face. She was barefoot, her carefully styled hair now slightly tousled, and the cocktail dress she'd worn downstairs clung to her like evidence. Her shock quickly turned to irritation as her eyes narrowed. "Mark? What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing," he replied, his voice deceptively calm. "Girls' trip, was it?" Her grip on the door tightened, but before she could respond, the man stepped into view. Tyler, tall and self-assured, wore an expensive-looking suit, his expression quickly shifting from curiosity to smug defiance. "Ashley," he said smoothly, "is this the husband?" Mark took a step forward, forcing the door wider. His eyes flicked between the two of them, noting their startled reactions, the subtle exchange of glances. He spoke again, his tone cold. "So this is what my wife's girls' trip looks like. Champagne, a luxury hotel, and—" "Mark, this isn't what it looks like," Ashley began, her voice tinged with desperation. "I can explain." "Really?" Mark shot back. "Because from where I'm standing, it's pretty clear you've been lying to me, Ashley, and I have proof." Mark reached into his pocket, pulling out his phone. The image he'd taken in the lobby glowed on the screen, a snapshot of her and Tyler laughing at the check-in desk. He held it up, watching as Ashley's face drained of color. Tyler, however, smirked, crossing his arms as if enjoying the spectacle. "You followed me?" she said, her voice rising in anger. "That's not the issue," Mark interrupted, his voice like steel. "The issue is that you're here, with him, while I'm home thinking you're with your friends." Tyler finally spoke, his voice dripping with arrogance. "Maybe we should all calm down. This doesn't have to get messy." Mark's gaze snapped to him. "Messy? You think this is messy now? Trust me, you haven't seen messy yet." Mark drove home in silence, his thoughts racing as the city lights blurred past. The confrontation at the hotel was only the beginning, a crack in the dam holding back a flood of betrayal. As much as he wanted to yell, scream, or demand answers, he knew better. Now wasn't the time for an emotional outburst. It was time to strategize. At home, the emptiness of the house felt heavier than usual. The warmth that Ashley's presence once brought now seemed like a distant memory, replaced by a cold void that mirrored his growing distrust. Mark settled into his study, his phone resting on the desk. He replayed the recording from earlier that night, his hands clenched into fists as Ashley and Tyler's voices filled the room. Every word, every denial, every smug comment from Tyler fueled his resolve. It wasn't enough to expose the affair. He needed to understand the full extent of the lies. How long had this been going on? How much of their life together had been a charade? And, perhaps most importantly, how far was Ashley willing to go to keep her betrayal hidden? The following day, Mark began his quiet investigation. First, he searched their shared laptop, combing through emails, messages, and files Ashley likely thought he'd never look at. It didn't take long to uncover the cracks. An email thread titled "Weekend Plans" caught his eye. The messages were short and vague, but the recipient wasn't one of Ashley's friends. It was Tyler. Mark opened the thread, scrolling through their back-and-forth exchanges. The emails confirmed his worst fears. The supposed girls' trip was a carefully planned rendezvous, complete with dinner reservations and a suite booked in Tyler's name. The dates stretched back months, painting a picture of a relationship far deeper than a single act of infidelity. Mark printed every email, filing them neatly into a folder. Next, he checked their bank statements. Ashley had always managed their household finances, a responsibility Mark had never questioned. But now, under the harsh light of suspicion, he noticed oddities. Charges from high-end restaurants, luxury boutiques, and spa services stood out, expenses he couldn't remember discussing, let alone approving. The most damning charge was a recurring payment to a hotel loyalty program, one Mark knew Ashley had no reason to use. Mark's stomach churned as he compiled the evidence. The woman he'd built his life with had been living a double life, siphoning their shared resources into a fantasy world she'd built with another man. By mid-afternoon, Mark decided to dig deeper into Tyler. Who was this man who had inserted himself so brazenly into his marriage? A quick online search revealed Tyler's LinkedIn profile, complete with a polished headshot and an overly confident biography. He worked in real estate, specializing in high-value properties. A public records search revealed a portfolio of upscale investments and a reputation for closing deals with ruthless efficiency. But it wasn't Tyler's professional life that interested Mark, it was the personal. A glance at Tyler's social media profiles revealed a man who lived lavishly, dinners at five-star restaurants, vacations at tropical resorts, and endless photos with expensive cars. Mark wondered how much of that lifestyle had been funded by unsuspecting partners like himself. Further digging revealed whispers of a pattern. Comments on real estate forums hinted at Tyler's charm, his way of ingratiating himself with clients and colleagues alike. But there were also veiled warnings. Watch your back. Too slick for his own good. He knows how to get what he wants. Mark leaned back in his chair, his jaw tightening. Tyler wasn't just a random fling, he was a professional manipulator. It wasn't just Ashley who had betrayed him. It was this man who had systematically wormed his way into their lives, exploiting every vulnerability. The next piece of Mark's puzzle came from an unlikely ally, Sarah, one of Ashley's closest friends. Sarah had always seemed uneasy around Mark, as if she were hiding something. He decided to take a chance, texting her under the pretense of checking in. To his surprise, she responded quickly, agreeing to meet for coffee that evening. At the cafe, Sarah looked nervous, her hands trembling slightly as she stirred her drink. "What's this about, Mark?" she asked, her voice hesitant. "I need answers," Mark said bluntly, "and I think you have them." Sarah hesitated, glancing around the room as if expecting Ashley to appear. I don't know what you're talking about." Mark pulled out his phone, showing her the photo of Ashley and Tyler at the hotel. Sarah's face fell, her facade crumbling. "She told me it was over," she whispered. "She said it was just a fling, that she'd made a mistake." "How long has this been going on?" Mark pressed. Sarah hesitated before answering. "A year, maybe more. She met Tyler through a friend at work. At first it was just drinks, then, well, you know how these things go." Mark's stomach sank. A year. For an entire year, Ashley had been lying to him, sharing their life while secretly building another. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice tight with anger. "I wanted to," Sarah said, her eyes welling with tears, "but Ashley begged me not to. She said she'd fix it, that she didn't want to hurt you." "She didn't want to hurt me." Mark's laugh was bitter. "She's been hurting me every single day." That night, Mark returned home, his folder of evidence heavier in his hands than it should have been. As he sat in the quiet of his study, he realized he wasn't just angry at Ashley, he was angry at himself. Angry for trusting too much, for ignoring the signs, for letting someone else dictate his life. But that was over now. He wasn't just uncovering Ashley's lies, he was taking back control. And when the moment came for the final confrontation, he would be ready. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, casting sharp lines across the bedroom floor. Mark sat on the edge of the bed, his hands clasped together as if trying to hold himself steady. Ashley's side of the bed was empty, as it had been for much of the past year in more ways than one. The quiet of the house felt oppressive, as if it knew what lay ahead. Today, Mark would confront Ashley, not just with his anger, but with the irrefutable truth. The previous night's preparations had been methodical. Mark laid out every piece of evidence he had gathered: the emails, the bank statements, the photo from the hotel, and the recording of their confrontation. He reviewed it all with the precision of a prosecutor building an airtight case. This wasn't just a betrayal of trust, it was an unraveling of their shared life, and Mark needed her to face the depth of her actions. Ashley returned home mid-morning, her demeanor guarded. She carried a shopping bag in one hand and her phone in the other, scrolling absently as she walked into the kitchen. Mark watched from the doorway, noting how she moved with an air of casual normalcy, as if nothing was amiss. It was infuriating. "Good morning," she said without looking up. Mark didn't reply. He stepped into the kitchen, placing the folder of evidence on the counter between them. The sound of the thick papers landing on the granite drew her attention. She froze, her smile faltering as she looked at the folder and then at Mark. "What's this?" she asked, her voice wavering slightly. "Everything," Mark said, his tone cold but controlled. "Everything you've been hiding." Ashley set the shopping bag on the floor, her hand trembling as she reached for the folder. She opened it slowly, her eyes scanning the contents. Her face shifted from confusion to shock to something resembling fear. She flipped through the emails, the receipts, the photos, each one chipping away at her composure. "I can explain," she started, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark held up a hand to silence her. "No more lies, Ashley. I've spent the last few days piecing together the truth because you wouldn't give it to me, so now you're going to listen." He began with the photo, placing it in front of her. "This was the night you told me you were with friends, remember? A girls' trip. That's Tyler, the man you've been sneaking around with for over a year." Ashley opened her mouth, but Mark didn't give her the chance to speak. He pulled out the bank statements next. "And this, luxury hotels, restaurants, shopping sprees, all on our joint account. While I'm home budgeting for groceries, you're funding your little affair." Her face turned red, whether from shame or anger Mark couldn't tell. "It's not what you think," she said, her voice shaking. "Tyler and it wasn't supposed to be serious. It just happened." Mark slammed his hand on the counter, the sound echoing through the room. "Don't insult me, Ashley. Affairs don't just happen. You made a choice. Every text, every lie, every night you spent with him was a choice." Tears welled in her eyes, but Mark didn't let himself soften. He reached for the recording on his phone, pressing play. Their voices filled the room. Ashley's excuses, Tyler's smug comments, the damning evidence of their deception. Ashley's hand flew to her mouth as she listened, her eyes wide with disbelief. You recorded us?" she stammered. "Yes," Mark said, his voice steady, "because I needed proof of who you've become." For a moment the kitchen was silent except for Ashley's quiet sobs. Mark crossed his arms, waiting for her to speak, to defend herself, to try to explain away the unforgivable. Instead, she sank into a chair, her head in her hands. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she said finally, her voice muffled. "I was lonely, Mark. You were always working, always busy. Tyler made me feel noticed." Mark's laugh was cold, devoid of humor. "Noticed? That's your excuse? I've been working to build a life for us, Ashley, to make sure we had everything we needed, and you repay me by sleeping with another man?" "It wasn't just about that," she said, looking up at him, her eyes pleading. "I felt like we were drifting apart, like You didn't care anymore." Mark shook his head, his anger boiling over. "Don't you dare turn this on me. I was here, Ashley. I was present. I trusted you, and you took that trust and threw it away." He let the weight of his words hang in the air before continuing. "This isn't just about the affair. It's about the lies, the manipulation, the choices you made that put Tyler ahead of us, ahead of me." Ashley wiped her eyes, a face pale. "I don't know what to say." "There's nothing to say," Mark replied. "You made your bed. Now you get to lie in it." He reached for the folder, gathering the evidence. "I've already spoken to a lawyer," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I'll be filing for divorce. You can figure out where to go from here, but it won't be with me."
Ashley's sobs grew louder, but Mark didn't flinch. He walked out of the kitchen, the folder under his arm, leaving her alone with the shattered remnants of the life they'd once shared. For Mark, the confrontation wasn't just about exposing the truth. It was about reclaiming his dignity. As he stepped outside into the crisp morning air, he felt lighter, freer. The pain of betrayal still lingered, but he knew he had taken the first step toward healing.
Mark sat in his now quiet home, the folder of evidence locked away in a drawer, his heart heavy but resolute. The confrontation with Ashley had been a catharsis, a moment where he reclaimed his voice and his dignity. Now, he faced the task of rebuilding his life. It wasn't just about moving on. It was about finding himself again in the wake of betrayal. The first step was practicality. Mark reached out to his lawyer the following morning to finalize the divorce proceedings. Every document, every piece of evidence was already prepared. His lawyer, a sharp woman named Rachel, commended his organization. "You've done the hard part, Mark," she said, reviewing the folder he handed her. "The facts are clear. This divorce will be straightforward." "Let's just get it done," Mark replied, his voice calm but firm. "I want it over." Rachel nodded, flipping through the evidence. "Ashley's financial records show she's been diverting funds for months. This will work in your favor, especially regarding assets and settlements. We'll make sure you come out of this with what you deserve." The word deserve hung in the air, a strange concept for Mark. For so long, he'd tied his sense of worth to the success of his marriage, the life they'd built together. Now he was forced to redefine what he deserved, what his future would look like. In the days following Ashley's departure, Mark focused on reclaiming his home. The space, once filled with shared memories, now felt alien, haunted by reminders of a life that no longer existed. He started small, rearranging furniture, repainting walls, and packing away items that belonged to Ashley. Each box carried a piece of their past: photo albums, souvenirs from vacations, even the dinnerware set they'd chosen together when they first got married. Mark felt a pang of sadness with every item he tucked away, but it was tempered by a sense of liberation. This wasn't just cleaning, it was cleansing. He donated what he could, giving old clothes and unused items to charity. The act of letting go, of physically removing pieces of their shared life, felt like an exorcism of sorts. By the time the house was cleared of Ashley's things, it looked and felt like a new space. A blank canvas ready for Mark to make his own. Friends and family began to notice the change. Mark had always been the steady one, the reliable friend, the quiet brother. Now there was something different about him, a spark of determination, a quiet strength. "Man, I can't believe you handled all that the way you did," his best friend Dave said one evening over drinks. "If I were in your shoes, I don't think I could have kept my cool." Mark shrugged, taking a sip of his beer. "I didn't see the point in losing it. She made her choices and I made mine. I couldn't control what she did, but I could control how I responded." "That's the thing," Dave said, shaking his head. "Most people would have just fallen apart, but you seem stronger." Mark wasn't sure if he felt stronger, but he knew he felt clearer. The betrayal had stripped away the illusions, forcing him to confront who he was and what he wanted. And what he wanted, more than anything, was to live authentically.
Mark threw himself into his passions, rediscovering hobbies he'd set aside during his marriage. His garage became a workshop where he began restoring an old motorcycle, a project he'd dreamed about for years. Weekends were spent hiking trails he'd always meant to explore, finding solace in nature's quiet beauty.
He reconnected with old friends, people he'd lost touch with during the years of prioritizing his marriage. Coffee dates turned into long conversations, their laughter reminding him of the joy he'd forgotten existed outside of his relationship. Through these small, deliberate actions, Mark found himself again. Not the version of himself defined by his marriage, but the person he was before Ashley, and maybe someone even better. The final step in his healing came unexpectedly. One evening, as Mark sat on his porch, sipping a cup of tea, his neighbor Christine stopped by. She was a single mother of two, with a warm smile and a no-nonsense attitude. They'd always exchanged pleasantries, but never more than that. "You look different," she said, leaning against the porch railing. "Different how?" Mark asked, raising an eyebrow. "Lighter," she replied, her smile softening, "like you've let go of something heavy." Mark nodded, realizing she was right. "I guess I have." Christine stayed for tea, and their conversation flowed effortlessly, touching on everything from favorite books to shared frustrations about lawn care. By the time she left, Mark felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. As the weeks turned into months, Mark's life transformed. The pain of betrayal faded, replaced by a quiet confidence. He had weathered the storm and emerged stronger, more sure of himself and his place in the world. Ashley and Tyler became distant memories, their betrayal no longer defining him. Instead, Mark was defined by his resilience, his ability to rebuild, and his determination to live life on his terms. For the first time in years, Mark felt truly free. And in that freedom, he found something far more valuable than the life he'd lost: himself.